So this is 1-3B, which is going to deal with a midpoint of a segment. For the most part, but there are a few other ideas we got to start with. That's an O. Sorry, that's an F. It's really sloppy. So we kind of talked about, as we were going over the homework a little bit, congruence. We're going to talk a little more about that. Yeah, Justin.
Is that like
Swirly
swirly thing next to the
thing. This?
Yeah.
That's a D. That's an I. M-I-D. Midpoint of a segment. No, sorry. I'm not very neat on the iPad. I got to get better at that. Last year I got to use the Apple Pen for a while on a Pro. That was awesome. I wrote so neat. Or Apple Pencil. Yeah, they're like $100, so. Yeah. I'll just try to slow down so you can read my writing. So when we talk about congruent segments, first of all, who can tell me what a segment is? A part of a line, right? It has endpoints. It doesn't keep going. So a line keeps going. A segment does not. So if we're talking about congruent segments, congruent means equal in length. So the symbol for congruence is actually an equal sign with a tilde over top. Kind of a messy one. Yeah, like the ñe in Spanish. Yes, same idea. So this is the symbol for it, is that equal sign with the tilde. But it just means if AB is the same length as CD, then we can say segment AB is congruent. I don't know why it doesn't want to write at the beginning. To segment CD. Okay, so if they're equal in length, we call them congruent segments. Now, the way we show that, let's say we have a parallelogram. Okay, and in a parallelogram, opposite sides are equal. So that means opposite sides are congruent. So if this is ABCD, okay, the way I can mark that opposite sides are the same, rather than have to say, well, this is 6 centimeters, so now I need to mark the other one as 6 centimeters. The simpler way, the quicker way to do it is just with little hash marks. So, for instance, if I know AB is 6 centimeters and I know CD is 6 centimeters, I can put one little hash mark on each of those, and those little markings are telling me they're the same. Those are equal in length, okay? Same goes if I have another pair of sides that are equal in length. So AD right now is the same length as BC. You can't just do one hash mark because that's saying that AB, AD, DC, and BC are all the same. So because these are a different length, we're going to use 2 hash marks. So right now this is telling me that AD is the same as BC and that AB is the same as DC. Does that make sense? Okay, so just hash marks to mark them congruent. All right, then we're going to talk about a midpoint. Anyone know what a midpoint is? A point in the middle, right? It is what it sounds like. A midpoint is the point in the middle. So if I have a segment, okay, the point in the middle of that segment. So in other words, if I have this point where this segment is the same as that segment, then my midpoint would be that point right there, okay? It cuts a segment in half. So you have 2 equal parts if it is a midpoint. So if this was A, B, and C, we would say B is the midpoint, and that makes AB congruent, which is, what does congruent mean? Equal. AB is congruent to BC. Okay. Same goes for what's called a bisector. A bisector is something that bisects. It cuts something in half. So along the same lines as a midpoint, but instead of being a point, now it can be a line, or it can be a segment, it can be a ray, just something that's going to cut a segment in half. So for a bisector, if you have a segment, let's say we have a line that cuts through so that these are the same length, okay? We would call that line the bisector because that line is cutting the segment in half. Okay, so you're gonna hear bisector a lot in this class. You're gonna hear midpoint a lot in this class. So just get familiar with those. If you ever have questions, just ask, and I will clear up whatever needs clearing up. Okay, so the one big example that I have for you today then is this. This is like example 4 in the book. So it jumps around because we're doing the second half of the lesson. So here's what it is. You good? So if I tell you this, if I tell you Q is the midpoint of PR, what are PQ, QR, and PR? And here's your segment. P, Q, and R. And then they show us that PQ is 6x minus 7. And they show us that QR is 5x plus 1. Okay, so here's what I need you to notice. On Friday, when we did a problem similar to this, they didn't tell us Q was the midpoint, right? So that's new information. But they did tell us the full length of PR, and they're not telling us that on this problem. Okay, so on Friday, we took this information, 6x minus 7 and 5x plus 1, and we added it together to set it equal to the whole thing, right? This one's different. Why? You're going to put an equal sign in the middle. Why? What about this problem told us they're equal to each other? Q is the what? Midpoint, right? So because of this word, you do this problem differently, right? Because we know Q is in the middle, that means that these two segments are equal. So you set them equal and you solve. Okay, that's the only difference in today's. So we're going to do 6x minus 7 equals 5x plus 1. Okay, and now that's the problem we're going to solve. So we're not adding them together anymore. Cameron.
We just solve it correctly, like regularly?
Yep, solve it like you would a normal algebra problem. So we're going to take away 5x from both of these. So you have x minus 7. This is gone, equals 1. And then you're going to add 7 to both sides. So x comes out to 8. Okay, but notice this, the question didn't ask what is x, right? The question asked what are PQ, QR, and PR. So you're going to take that x value and you're going to plug it in for our x's here. So that means PQ is going to be 6 times our x value, which was what? 8. So 6 times 8 minus 7. So PQ is you do 48 minus 7, so 41. Okay, so that's PQ. Then we need to do the same thing for QR. Before you try and plug it into QR, can you tell me how long QR is? 41.
Wait.
Right? Why 41? Without plugging it in, how do you know it's 41?
Oh,
Because they're congruent, because it's the midpoint, right? So because they told us this was a midpoint, that Q was a midpoint, we know these have to be the same. So without even plugging it in, we know right now 41. You still should plug it in to check it in case you did something wrong. So this would be 5 times 8 plus 1. So QR equals 41. Okay, so then what is PR? If this is 41 and this is 41, what is the whole thing?
82.
41 times 2, or 41 plus 41, which is 82. You have to say what PR is. Yeah. Who just asked me that? Yeah, so you'll add them together. This one plus that one equals the whole thing. Okay? Any questions on that?